Tonight on Nation to Nation, are politics a poisoned well for Indigenous women?
Let's be honest here. Politics is a blood sport.
Kitigan Zibi calls out organizers of an Indigenous summit.
You feed the beast, they're going to keep wanting to get fed.
And reversing the decline of Indigenous languages in British Columbia.
It's really good news.
Good evening and welcome to Nation. I'm Lindsay Richardson. We begin tonight, where else but in the world of politics. 7 years ago, Melanie Mark was celebrated as the first First Nations woman to be sworn into British Columbia's legislature. But fast forward those 7 years, and triumph has turned to tragedy as Mark walked away from her political career.
When I described it as a torture chamber, it's because of the things that I had to endure from the official opposition. And I've made it clear on the record that mostly white men have been particularly vile and rude, and quite honestly, I just never imagined that that's what it would be like for an elected official.
Mark's resignation has raised questions across the board. For one, was it always like this? And few would know better than Ethel Blondin Andrew, who 35 years ago became the first Indigenous woman elected to Canada's Parliament. And I'm happy to say she's joining us now on Zoom. Ethel, what a pleasure to have you. Thanks for being here today.
Great being here.
So I guess just starting off with the news of the day, what's your reaction to Melanie Mark's resignation and the powerful words that she shared as a parting message?
You know, I know Melanie. I've known her when I was a member of Parliament before she was elected. And she's a very strong-minded individual, very determined. She's come through a lot. And I have great admiration and respect for her as an individual. And I think it's, to me, it's always sad when we lose an Indigenous person, could be a man or a woman, in this case it's a woman, out of the public service, out of our representation in the public, in the various institutions, in this case the BC legislature. I'm sad. It's their loss. It really is their loss. She's a very determined individual. This will not be the last of her. And I'm hoping she takes a break. And, you know, it's not, I always used to tell these young girls, it's not how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get up. So I'm expecting her to rise again.
Yeah, no doubt a very difficult personal decision in this case. But on to you and your personal experience now. Let's walk things back slightly to 1988 when you were first appointed. Can you tell us what exactly drew you into this political line of fire or life in politics in general?
I wanted to be there to make change for my people. I know the history of my people, and I wanted to start seeing our representation and our inclusion in places on perhaps roads less traveled. And that's what I tried to do in 1988. And I made no bones about the fact that if I can do it, you can do it too. And many have since. And I always told people, yeah, I could be the first, but I don't want to be the last. I want lots of people to experience representation. Like, I want our people at the UN. I want our people all over in different categories. I want them at the World Economic Forum. They should be at COP 16, 15, whatever is happening on the environment. And I want to see the legislatures full of our people, if that's what they choose, or if they choose to do self-government. Right now, I'm a chief negotiator for self-government. I'm working with my team. I'm not the negotiator. It's the team that negotiates for that. But we need to make those choices for, you know, you move ahead, you make good choices, you really learn the system and you move in. And I know this is what Melanie did. And it's tough. Let's be honest here. politics is a blood sport. I was told that by my colleague Sheila Copps once. And I said, really? She said, oh yeah, it's tough. It's tough. You got to go toe to toe and stand with people. And you have to be like Dr. Seuss. You have to, be what you say and say what you be. And that's the way it is.
Yeah. Now, Melanie Mark did mention issues with opposition parties and non-Indigenous reps in the House of Commons, particularly white males. So these are sort of the factors that contributed to her decision to resign. But how would you describe the political climate back in 1988 when you were starting out?
Well, I was very blessed. I come from a very strong matriarchal family. The women in my family are tough, starting with my big grandmother, Catherine Onte. She feared nothing. She said, men and women, any race, any color, are just human beings. You've got nothing to be afraid of. And that's how I felt. I was bold in the face of criticism, bold in the face of, people patronizing me. I didn't care. I was going to go and I was going to be there. And this was my place to stand. And that's where I was going to be. And if I wanted to be over there, that's where I was going. So it's interesting. You make sacrifices. One of the sacrifices you make in public life is sometimes you have to know when to fold them. You have to know when to concede. You have to know when you got to give a little more. And there's a never-ending list of sacrifices you make with your family. You give up your health. So many people that I know that went in politics gave up their health. I gave up drinking and smoking because I knew that I couldn't stay healthy if I didn't do that.
Absolutely. So obviously it's a grind. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But also this resignation by Melanie Mark has sort of reopened conversations about systemic racism and how it permeates Canada's systems. So aside from the toll and logistical and workplace challenges, would you say that Canadian politics have a systemic racism problem today in 2023?
Well, those of us that are Indigenous, we come from a different mindset. We come from collectives, not individual rights. And everything's done as a community as a whole in our community. And you get that aloneness and oneness and upmanship, brinksmanship, all that stuff when you go into public life. And it's tough. Like systemic racism is something that's a natural part of a colonized government. This government, if you're not in your own, like the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk, they have their own, they have their own government. They've always had their own system. But if you're not like from the Indigenous people that have their own way of governing, and you try to integrate and you expect something of Western government, if you expect something of parliamentary lifestyle and thinking and working, you got to know what you're getting into. You really have to know what you're sacrificing. You really have to know what the compromises will be. And you have to, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's the best. What I'm saying, it is what it is. That's what politics is. It's tough.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Ethel, thank you so much for your wit and your wisdom and for taking the time to look back with us today. Hopefully it will help people to look forward into the future.
Thank you. Masicho.
Time for a quick break, but when we come back, an Indigenous-led event hit by identity questions. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Rendezvous des Nations, or Gathering of Nations, kicks off this week in Gatineau, uniting Indigenous performers and leaders for a 3-day post-COVID celebration. But at least one community turned down their invitation. The event is put on by a group called the Quebec Native Alliance, claiming to represent Indigenous people living off reserve and using funds from Heritage Canada. In a letter, they invited Kitigan Zibi Chief Dylan White Duck to do them the great honor of speaking at the opening ceremony. In a written reply, White Duck responded, "This is cultural appropriation," calling on federal and provincial leaders to intervene. Quebec Native Alliance refused to answer APTN's questions about this exchange of letters, but Chief Dylan White Duck is on the line with us now. Great, Chief White Duck, thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Lindsay.
So I guess as a first question, why did you opt to respond and release your response in the way that you did?
Well, we were getting some feedback from our members. And just like any seasoned politician and anybody that takes the direction of their members, it was time to take a stance. It was important that we take a stance. And I want to really thank our Kitigan Zibi Anishinaabe members for pushing us, the council, and myself to address this matter. At the end of the day, I'm just here to take direction from my community, and this was the concerns that we had, was this event that was going to be taking place and ongoing as we speak.
So why don't you just sum up the crux of your objections? Like, was Kitigan Zibi aware of this group before the announcement of the event was made?
They've been around, they say, for over 50 years. Our former chiefs, both Jean-Guy White Duck and Gilbert White Duck, they had their similar occurrences of running into this group in the past. We've always notified them that we don't agree with what their organization has done. We weren't too progressive in the approach that we're taking. Jean-Guy was wrote letters. Our former chief Jean-Guy White Duck wrote letters. Gilbert wrote letters. So there was some back and forth dialogue that we didn't agree with what they were doing, issuing cards. So it was a matter of time, I felt like, and it kind of stems from all the past occurrences of these cards and non-Indigenous people trying to legitimize themselves. People are trying to gain inherent rights like we have.
Now, so does this issue, I guess you could say, of self-declaration impact Kitigan Zibi directly, or are your concerns more big picture based?
It already has impacted us in the past. We had some of these people who obtain these cards try to gas up on the community, tried to buy cigarettes using these cards, trying to use these cards at car dealerships to save the tax exemption for cars being delivered on reserve, tax exempt. So it already impacted us in the past. We had occurrences with the Ministry of Quebec and CPAC, and they catch people with these cards trying to hunt and self-declare themselves as Indigenous people. So there's a lot of confrontation and a lot of damages that are done with this organization and group, and they don't understand the extent of what the harm they're causing to Indigenous people. More recently, we had a chiefs meeting with the AFNQL, and Ghislain Picard is preparing a very strong statement against this group. And at this point in time, we have to understand that this group is just trying to legitimize themselves. We want to stop them at once before any more legitimization and any more grounds for them to become some sort of group that becomes more recognized by the government of Canada, Quebec, cities. So this is the stance we had to take, and this is not just happening here in Quebec, by the way. It's happening across all of Canada now. So there's many provinces that are dealing with these groups that just pop out of nowhere, and there's no law and order for these groups. And unfortunately, sometimes they even get funding from the government of Canada, which feeds the ego of them. So you feed the beast, they're going to keep wanting to get fed. So it's just wrong. And I think Canada, and there has to be some sort of law and order regarding organizations that try and self-declare and issue cards like this.
Now, in your letter, you signed off calling on several tiers of government to respond and intervene in the holding of this event. To this point, have you heard anything back from them?
We got two responses. Personally, we weren't too satisfied with the response from Zibi Development. They acknowledged that they were sorry, and in any future event that's Indigenous related, they'll reach out to us. It's not a favorable response. I'm disappointed with that response. The community should be disappointed with the response, and Indigenous people should be disappointed with that response from them. We thought a good gesture of what they should have done is just cancel the event and just give them back their money for hosting the event at their grounds. The city of Gatineau acknowledged that there was not much they could have done. They don't have any bylaws with regards to festivals and events that take place in the city. So once an event is held on private lands, there's not much the city can do, but the mayor and her team, France Belize, acknowledges it, and she wants to continue working with Kitigan Zibi, and they want no affiliation or nothing to do with this organization. So they're quite aware of the situation, the city of Gatineau, and I want to recommend and applaud them for understanding the context of this. It's quite complex. It's not easy for a non-Indigenous person to understand, but this is why we're highlighting the importance and trying to get Canadians to understand the barriers, the stigma that we faced for millennial, and you know, in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, no one wanted to be a part of an Indian. No one wanted to be associated with a First Nation individual. Nowadays, you can't even, once someone thinks they're First Nation or Indian, they'll jump out of bed quicker than ever before. So, and Lindsay, it really stems from greed. It's money. It's all about the grants, the rights. There's more claims, class actions happening across Canada. So people can't jump out of bed quicker to be Native now.
That's unfortunately all the time we have, but thank you, Chief White Duck, for weighing in and for giving us a bit more context about how important this issue is.
Great. Thank you for having me, and take care.
You as well.
Josh.
We need to take one more quick break, but just ahead, some good news from the West Coast. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's been accepted as a general truth that by the end of this century, only 3 Indigenous languages, Cree, Ojibwe, and Inuktitut, will continue to exist. But a new report out of British Columbia seems to suggest otherwise, that a growing number of people in BC are speaking an Indigenous language at home. The report was done by the First Peoples Cultural Council, and Tracy Herbert is their CEO. She joins me now. Welcome.
White, thank you. It's good to be here.
So I guess that's the first question. This is the 4th report that the Council has done over the years. So how does this year's version differ, and what does it actually say about the state of languages in BC?
We had really good response despite a lot of issues that our community partners have faced, COVID, wildfires. We had about an 84% rate of response from communities. And what they're reporting is that there has been a significant increase in the number of people learning a BC First Nations language, an increase of 20% over our last report.
Okay. What accounts for the reversal of this trend towards, for lack of a better word, extinction of Indigenous languages in BC?
Well, First Peoples is an organization whose mandate specifically is to revitalize BC First Nations arts, language, and heritage. And we have been successful in partnership with BC First Nations to advocate for an investment in the revitalization of languages. And so we've seen a significant investment since 2018. And as a result, many opportunities have been available for BC First Nations people to learn their languages, and they're taking it up. And we have a whole new generation of young people taking up the mantle to be the new knowledge keepers and language leaders for the coming generations. It's really good news.
Yeah, obviously youth are always such huge drivers of change in so many areas. But now, in this decade of Indigenous languages, I'm curious, how much credit do you think we should be giving to the Indigenous Languages Act that was passed by the federal government a couple of years ago now?
Yes, well, it certainly has helped to raise the profile of Indigenous languages across Canada. And BC has been doing this work even before the legislation came into place, but we were really excited to have the support of the federal government and that funding investment in the work that BC First Nations are doing to revitalize their languages, because there's a ton of work to be done, from documentation, curriculum development, immersion, and the work that we support is community-based, so it's outside a formal education system.
Community-based, I'm curious. Let's get into that a little bit. What is being done in the communities to safeguard languages for future generations? Do you have any examples offhand you can think of?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We have 19 programs supporting language revitalization and arts and cultural heritage in BC. And one of our most successful initiatives has been the Mentor Apprentice program. And it's really pairing someone that wants to learn the language with a fluent speaker. And they spend hundreds of hours together in an immersive environment just conversing in the language. And we found that that has been the most successful way of creating new speakers. And then also offering an immersion environment with language nests, so from babies to preschool, where their entire experience in a daycare or a language nest is in the language. They're just like little sponges. And as you said, what's exciting about the report is that we've highlighted some families who learned their language as adults and are now teaching their children in the home.
Yeah, it's really amazing, and not something that should be feared. I know in Quebec, obviously, where I'm from, language is a very contentious issue, and protecting, the primary languages takes precedent over protecting Indigenous languages. So on that note, what do First Nations and other provinces need to do if they find their languages are rapidly disappearing?
Well, it's very complex work. There's many things that we need to do. You need to create new speakers at the same time as documenting the languages. And many years ago, in the early 2000s, BC developed firstvoices.com. And it's a community-based online language tool where you can archive your languages, both audio, digital files, and then make that accessible to language learners. But all of the data is curated and owned by the community. So that's very key, is to ensure that you've documented the language from mother tongue speakers. And then again, immersion to create those new fluent speakers. Who can then go on to become teachers or work in ECD environments, work at the as a youth coordinator, work in health, but just have that ability to converse in the language.
Tracy, thanks for joining us today. It's the perfect piece of good news to end our show on for this evening.
Great. Thank you so much, Cook's Gem.
That's all we have on deck for you tonight. But if you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our website at aptnnews.ca or our podcasts. For those, you can go to aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Lindsay Richardson. Thank you for joining us this evening, and until next time.